Hello and welcome to Cooking the Books with Heather. On this episode, we're going to be working out of Tanya Holland's Brown Sugar Kitchen Cookbook, and we are going to be making spiced winter squash soup. Now, I really wanted to make this last year, but I started looking for the ingredients a little bit late in the season. I think it was like January or so. And one of them is really hard to find in this area when it is not in season, because it is this delicata squash. It is a winter squash. Apparently the skin actually gets pretty tender, so you can eat the skin on this one after it's cooked. I don't think we're going to be doing that here. So I was on the lookout and got this now. It is the beginning of fall here. Finally starting to cool down. We have a nice gray, rainy kind of day, and it's perfect for some soup. So the first thing we have to do for this soup is to roast all of this stuff in the oven for quite a while. So I'm gonna be preparing my squashes and so I've got some squashes. We have delicata squash, we have a butternut squash, and we have an acorn squash. This one's kind of large. This is kind of a medium. This is actually pretty large for delicata as far as what I can get here. We have some Granny Smith apples. We have a yellow onion and some garlic. I think that's everything we need to roast. I have my oven preheated at 425, and I have my baking sheet lined with parchment. We're supposed to be able to fit all of this on here. We'll see how that works. If we can't, I'll have to get another one. But I was just going to show you how you can handle these winter squash. She tells you to have them, what does it say? It says halved and seeded. So we're just going to cut it in half, long way. And these are really difficult to cut. Be very careful not to hurt yourself. Experience, but okay. So I have just a grocery bag here that I can throw all of my seeds and stuff in. And I am going to be using an ice cream scoop that I have to kind of scoop out the seeds here. I'm just gonna put this on my baking tray. I'm gonna do my acorn squash next. All right, so this is the inside of the acorn squash. I didn't do great at having it, but we're gonna roast these for quite a while, and that should be not a problem. Acorn squash, all seeded, goes on my, I just have a little, actually no, I thought it was, there's a little blemish. I thought it might be a little soft and moldy, but it's not, so I'm not gonna worry about cutting that out. Onto my baking tray. So now we have our butternut squash. Often I slice it here, and that because it makes it easier to cut in half, but I'm gonna leave them whole this time, and it's gonna be pretty difficult. Actually, this, I'm gonna just go ahead and slice this off, because that often makes it really hard to slice through. This one, if you've not seen it before, it's fully squash here. There are no seeds until you get to the rounded part. There we go. So you can see there's a lot of flesh in these and not a lot of seeds. Now this is going on my baking tray. I left a little bit of space for my apples and my onion. I think I can fit it all on the same tray. But what I need to do now is peel these and peel and cut the seeds out and quarter them. So. Okay, so this is how I usually cut apples for my kids. I don't usually peel them, but cut them in quarters. like that. And then if you want to keep as much of the apple as you can, which I usually do, I usually just sort of cut a V shape here to get the seeds out. And so that's going to be my quartered Granny Smith apple. So now I just need to cut my large yellow onion into chunks. So I'll probably cut this into, I don't know, about 8ths, I guess. Take the skin off. Actually, maybe I'll just do, I don't know, maybe quarters. Yeah, we'll do 8ths. There we go. And so now these go also onto our baking tray. We're supposed to be able to stir the apples and the onions every so often. We'll see. And as far as cutting things up, the last thing we have to do is to, let's see, get that away. The last thing we have to do is to slice the top third off of our garlic. And we're gonna roast this just like this. We're gonna wrap it in aluminum foil. We're supposed to put it on the baking sheet with the squash. It certainly isn't gonna fit with everything else, but we're going to wrap this with aluminum foil. So let me go take care of that. I think I need to get a little bit more off. There we go. What we're kind of looking for is to be able to see all the cloves of garlic. So I sliced a little bit more off of that. So usually when I wrap this in aluminum foil, I double it and sort of wrap it up around. And then we're going to drizzle everything with olive oil. So I'm going to clean all this stuff off of my work surface. I'm supposed to have some unsalted butter at room temperature. I did not do that, but this will have to do. I think it doesn't really matter considering. So the first thing I'm gonna do is drizzle a tiny bit. I'm not gonna measure this. It's supposed to be a super, super tiny bit, like a half teaspoon or so. Just drizzle a little bit onto your garlic and then wrap this up tightly. And I could probably set it right there and that'll be fine. And then we're going to drizzle, I'm gonna measure this because why not? Drizzle some olive oil onto our onions and apples. There we go. And, oh shoot. We need to dot the squash with the butter. Okay, that is the best I can do with the butter. And I need some thyme. Forgot to get that. So I have to go outside and get some sprigs of thyme. Be right back. So I have my thyme. It's starting to go a little woody, but there's enough for today. Scatter our thyme over our vegetables. There we go. A little bit everywhere. That'll be good. So we're putting this in the oven at 425 and it will take about an hour and 15 minutes, an hour to an hour and 15, she says. But we're checking it every 15 minutes and stirring up the apples and the onions. So we'll see how that goes. I'll show you what it looks like when I take it out. Maybe not the first time because it won't look very different, but I'll let you know when I show you. So into the oven it goes. All right, so it's been about 45 minutes and I'm gonna check. I think my garlic smells really good. Got a little fork to sort of check for tenderness. Yeah, garlic, really tender. I'm gonna take this off. We're supposed to basically take off anything that's tender, and while the rest continues to cook. These are a little tender, but not completely done. Acorn squash, certainly not done. Butternut squash, certainly not done. Some of the apples seem done, but I think I'm just gonna leave it all in here for a while longer. You can see some of them are really tender, but not all of them. This one's really still hard. So I'm gonna try to move the hard ones out from away from things, and the tender ones sort of back where they maybe won't cook much longer, but we're gonna keep going for probably at least another half an hour. We're at 45 minutes right now, like I said, so we'll see you back here when it's all done. It took almost 2 hours to cook all of our squash. At about 45 minutes, I took the garlic out. At about 1 hour and 15, I took the apples and onions out. An hour and a half, I took out the delicata squash. I decided that was done. 1 hour and 45, I took out the acorn squash. Another 15 minutes, at 2 hours, I took out the butternut squash. So it took a lot longer than she said. I don't know if mine are bigger than the one she had. You know, it's just one squash, right? Sizes vary quite a bit. So I tried to choose sort of a medium, who knows. But the next thing we have to do, those are resting. They have to rest for about 15 minutes. You just don't want them to be super, super hot when you do the next step. But so I'm going to start cooking we're going to basically bloom the spices in oil. And I have my spices measured out here, some paprika, some cinnamon, and some cayenne. And we need some fresh grated ginger. Now, I find it a whole lot easier to grate ginger when it's frozen. So I peel it, put it in a bag, put it in the freezer, and then just grate however much I need from frozen. And yes, it can hurt your fingers because it's very, very cold, but it grates so much better. You don't have to worry about all of the fibers that you get when it's fresh. It's much less fibrous. It cuts so much better. So I'm going to guesstimate how much we need here. I think that'll be pretty good. Whew, very cold. And just measure it. Make sure that'll be good, I think. Just going to put as much of this in there as we can. There we go. And that'll be great. So now what I have to do is heat up some olive oil I'm gonna use my largest soup pot, my largest stock pot. I don't know exactly how much this is gonna make. She says it's a pretty large batch because you can't really buy half of a squash, so she uses the whole squashes. So I'm going to heat up my oil over on the stove, but we're going to bring it back over here for the next step, and I'll show you what happens then. So we're going to heat it up on medium heat until shimmering, and then I'll bring it over here. Got my oil shimmery on medium heat, and I'm going to immediately put in all of my spices. There should be enough residual heat to cook it over here, so I'm not too worried about that. We're just trying to sort of bloom all of our spices in the hot oil before we add everything else. So they'll get nice and fragrant and cook just a little bit. said about 30 seconds. So this is still sort of sizzling a little bit, so it will be absolutely fine as is. And some of our ginger got a little stuck to the bottom, but that's okay. All right, so we're gonna call that good. And the next thing we do is put all of those vegetables that we roasted back in here, but discard the thyme sprigs. So first I have the apples and onions. I'm going to put these are pretty cool. I'm gonna put these in here and try to find, there we go. There's a thyme sprig. Try to take these out as I do that. It's a lot easier with the other ones because they're sort of sitting on top. But with this, it all kind of mushed together. So we just don't want the woody stems in there. I got a little bit more of one right there. There we go. Now I'll wash up, and I missed one right there. Fell into the pot. All right, so we've got our apples and onions. And we're supposed to do this off the heat. So apples and onions, and now we have to scoop out the flesh of the squashes and add them in here. So I'm going to just use the same ice cream scoop I used. I just rinsed it. I'm going to discard the thyme and just scoop everything, all of the flesh out of the skin. The skin is just the part we don't want. Now I'm going to do this half of the delicata squash, and it's really cool, so I'm just going to hold it over here. Since these are the last ones that came out, they are still pretty warm, but I expect it'll come out pretty well. There we go. Butternut squash have a beautiful orange color, but they will discolor your cutting boards if you cut them on a cutting board. If your cutting board is white, like mine are. I think that's good enough for that one. And so I'm just going to do the other halves of my squashes, and we'll show you what we do after that. Okay. So the last thing I need to add into here is our roasted garlic. So hopefully this is supposed to just sort of squeeze out of the skins, which it is very nicely. So we just don't want the papery skin of the garlic here. There we go. So I'm going to wash my hands and discard all of this stuff, and then we need to add the stock because it's not soup yet without some sort of liquid base. So the first thing I'm going to add now is a little bit of salt. I am fairly certain we're going to have to add more later, but it depends on your stock, I'm sure. I've got about a cup of chicken stock left over that I just haven't used up. It was in my refrigerator from another recipe. I'm going to use that. And the rest, I'm going to just put some water in, and then I'll put in some of my chicken soup base. I use that a lot. If you are vegetarian, you can feel free to use vegetable stock instead of chicken stock here. We just happen to have some chicken stock available, and we're not vegetarian. But, and if you're vegan, there's another ingredient that won't, I mean, you could use margarine instead of butter, or, you know, a butter substitute. And then we're gonna add some heavy cream to this later. You could add some coconut cream, I'm sure, or coconut milk. But let me get the rest of my stock in here. And our soup base. I'm gonna measure it. I don't often, but I'm going to this time. Trying to get there. All right. Now the next step is we put this back on the stove, and we want to put it, let's see, medium heat again. We're going to bring it to a simmer and simmer it for 15 minutes, stirring occasionally. So that's what we're going to do, and we'll show you what it looks like in about 15, probably more like 20 when we bring it up to a simmer minutes. All of my soup ingredients have been simmering for about 15 minutes. And you can see it's not a really appetizing texture at the moment, but we are going to make this a nice smooth soup using one of my absolute favorite kitchen tools that not everybody has, but I think everybody should have, an immersion blender. So she says to let it cool a little bit. You do have to kind of be careful when you use this on something hot. You can also put batches in a blender and do it that way, but this is so much easier and such easy cleanup. It's my favorite. So we're just gonna blend this until it is really smooth using this. Put it down in, turn it on, and move it around until everything's smooth. So, okay, got this almost where I want it, but the next step is to just stir in some heavy cream. So I'm gonna add it and mix it up with my immersion blender just to make sure everything is where I want it. Like I said, if you are looking for a vegan, you could, substitute this with coconut milk or coconut cream would be great. And it would be fine. So a little more blending. All right, there we go. Very smooth soup. If this is a bit thick for you, and it will depend on the size of your squashes and all of that, you can add water or broth to thin it out to your preference. And you can also keep this, she says, in the refrigerator for about 3 days and just warm it gently on the stove. I'm gonna put this in my sink. And the last thing we're gonna do is stir it up and take a little taste for seasoning. See if we need some more salt, and we're definitely gonna add some black pepper. Okay, it definitely needs some salt. And it definitely has a little bit of a kick. I'm interested to see what my kids think of that. All right, so we've got a little extra salt and black pepper. Stir that in. This is pretty thick, but not too bad. I'm gonna keep it like this, but if we rewarm it, we'll probably add a little extra water because as you warm it, it generally thickens. So one more taste. Still needs more salt to me. But of course, you can add more to your liking, to your serving. So, but I think that will be good. And that is it, and we'll let you know what the whole family thinks in just a second. On this episode of Cooking the Books with Heather, you watched me make the spiced winter squash soup from Tanya Holland's Brown Sugar Kitchen cookbook. This took longer than she said, but it's not really a hard soup. You just kind of roast all of your vegetables in the oven before you cook it, instead of cooking it, chopping them up fine and cooking them in, or chopping them up at all really, and cooking them in the pan and then putting them in a lot of water and cooking them like that. You roast them in the oven first and get them pretty much done. Then you add the stock and just let it sort of all come up to a simmer for a while. And then you have soup. So most of the cooking process is really in the oven beforehand, and for us it took about 2 hours. So that's a lot more than the hour and 15 that she suggested. But again, our squashes may have been larger than hers. who knows? Whatever. It took us 2 hours for all of them to be done. They did get done at different rates. It was the only equipment that I personally would suggest that you have for this is that immersion blender. You can use a regular blender. You could probably use a food processor. Both of those are much more difficult to deal with a hot soup than the immersion blender. In my personal opinion, I'm always afraid that they're going to explode all over me. Whereas the immersion blender has never done me wrong in that way. So, and they're not that expensive and they don't take up a lot of room. So highly recommend. There was a surprising amount of heat in the soup, considering there's really a really small amount of cayenne pepper in it. But our thought is that blooming it in the oil really helped bring out that flavor. It was not spicy so much, like it did not hurt your mouth, but it was sort of the back of the throat heat that you felt while you were eating it. So, and it did not linger. So if you don't like spicy foods, this is still fine. It was just sort of a surprising thing that we found when we ate this soup. I really think that it would be great with a little bit of creme fraiche or sour cream. We stirred a little bit in, put a little bit on ours, and it was really good. And also potentially a little bit of dry sherry, sort of like a bisque. It complemented the flavors really well, added a bit of a sweet note to it. We enjoyed that. I also think that if I had some time, I would have, and I do actually have some sage, I would have made some fried sage, because for me, sage goes really well with the winter squash flavors, and I think that would have been a really pretty garnish on there. I didn't do it though because I was being lazy. So, yeah, I think we really enjoyed this soup, and if you really like a winter squash soup, this is a great version. I think this is one of my favorites so far. So, if you enjoyed watching me make this, please give me a thumbs up. Hit the subscribe button and come back and watch me make something else next week.